Welcome to Simply Walk the Talk. Our bodies and minds adapt to what we do most of the time. If you want to change your body and mind, you must change what it is you do most of the time. This podcast explores all things health, wellness, fitness, lifestyle, and biohacking. Stay tuned as we explore various thoughts, methods, and experiences from a multitude of conversations between our interesting guests and experts through many fields of work. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the show.
Simply walk the talk. Simply walk the talk.
Recording in 3, 2, 1. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another mind-blowing episode of Simply Walk the Talk. I am your host, Joshua J. Holland, and today I have a conversation with someone that you definitely want to be a fly on the wall and listen in on. Her name is Caitlin Thompson, and Caitlin is a neurobiologist and certified Kambo practitioner, administering unique traditional Amazonian frog medicine rituals throughout the Southwest. Yes, I said frog rituals. Caitlin is also an independent scientific researcher and research associate at UCSD School of Medicine, and is currently conducting research on the potential of psychedelic compounds as a novel approach to autoimmune conditions, as well as the first human Kambo studies. After conquering her own battle with depression and anxiety, Caitlin set out on a mission to share healing tools and empower other individuals to take their mental wellness into their own hands. During her healing process, from Lyme disease, chronic fatigue, PTSD, pain, and a plethora of other typical autoimmune symptoms, she founded her nutritional supplement company and began practicing Kambo in an effort to make evidence-based magic of lesser-known modalities available to those in need. Caitlin Thompson, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Josh, for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here with you.
Yeah, so I have to give a shout out to our dear friend, Mr. Roy Matz, who connected us, because if it wasn't for Roy, we wouldn't be doing this right now. And when he mentioned to me that we might be able to get you onto the show, I was so excited. And I read through some of your profile and your bio, and I'm like, wow, this is really cool, because I've heard of Kambo before, and I've heard of some of the frog ritual things. And I think the most recent discovery in Kambo, at least what I can recall, is when I heard about Mike Tyson, his sort of foray into the world of Kambo, and he talked about it on his Hot Boxing podcast. And I just thought, like, oh man, this is going to be so cool, so we can really dive into it today. But before we do that, let's talk about your background a little bit deeper, and just kind of give people a sense of why they should continue listening to this podcast.
Because I'm lots of fun. So my formal education is in neurobiology, and I always joke that my passion for psychedelics was what allowed me to get through my undergrad, because I really was fascinated by psychedelics, and I wanted to understand them deeper on a scientific level, to really intimately know them. But my story really actually comes from my own struggle and my own pain, like many other people's stories. And it turns out I've been chronically ill most of my life, and I didn't even realize. And I had pretty much suffered for most of my life with chronic fatigue, depression, anxiety, pain, digestive malabsorption, food allergies, skin issues, and all sorts of things. And I didn't even know. And it's actually funny, because psychedelics helped me accidentally get better enough to see the contrast between being healthy and being sick. And that's what helped me actually identify that what I went through on a daily basis wasn't normal. So I'll tell a short story about when I was doing my undergraduate in neurobiology. So I got into psychedelics at a pretty young age. I started in the rave scene at age 18 and was exploring with MDMA and LSD and psilocybin. And then that very quickly escalated to more of a spiritual connection with psychedelics. So by the time I was 20, I was smoking DMT. And then when I was 21, I went to the Amazon in Peru by myself and drank ayahuasca there. And so while, everyone else in college was binge drinking, I was going to Burning Man and going to Peru and drinking ayahuasca and having these really profound psychedelic experiences. And so this was a pretty consistent part of my young adult life. And I knew that I was evolving and changing as a person, but what I didn't realize was that they were actually medicating me for a number of symptoms that I just hadn't noticed were actually underneath the surface. And when I got into my last year or so of college, I took a step back from drugs and partying, mostly just to focus on kind of my harder classes like organic chemistry, biochemistry, stuff like that. And like clockwork, what I discovered was that around the 7th to 8th week mark after my last LSD or psychedelic experience, I started to kind of unravel, like chemically. I started to get increasingly anxious and irritable and distressed for no apparent reason. And I finally was able to pinpoint that this was happening at this 7 to 8 week mark after my last psychedelic experience. And so this led to me discovering that I actually had, chemically based depression, anxiety, and other symptoms that I had been mitigating with regular psychedelic use. And so once I discovered this, I thought, okay, well, I don't want to have to take psychedelics for the rest of my life, or I want to understand what's causing this. And that led me down a rabbit hole of an obsession of understanding the science around mood disorders. And that led me to understanding the microbiome, to understanding Lyme disease and autoimmunity, and how nutrition plays a foundational role in healthy brain function. And then that kind of created the birth of my supplement company. And it just accelerated me on not only a healing path, but a career path of being dedicated to understanding more and more about how to sort these things out in people. So, psychedelics were at the beginning and hopefully will be my ally throughout my whole journey in helping empower others.
That's amazing. I think what comes to mind, I try to put myself in the shoes of young Josh, like when I was in high school and even in college, and I was fed this, I guess, vilification of all kinds of drugs, right? Just drugs in general. Obviously, then I didn't understand the separation between over-the-counter drugs and sort of medicine as drugs and everything else. But it was just kind of like, don't do drugs. And so I didn't really start to experience things like cannabis and even drinking alcohol until well after I was 21. And when I started to really explore some of the true science and my own actual feelings and my own actual experiences, that's when I started to understand that, like, wait a minute, I'm missing out on quite a bit out there. And as long as I can harness this properly and have good intention, I think I may have a much more profound experience in life, because a lot of these chemicals and compounds are here for a reason, I kind of feel like, right? Especially when it comes to the cannabinoid receptors in the body and things like that, right? Like, I feel like these things were put on earth for us to be able to tap into other realms and have profound experiences beyond just the day-to-day grind. So one of the things that comes to mind, though, is when I I guess when I was also young and I didn't quite understand it, all these kind of psychedelic drugs, I didn't really key in on the fact that like maybe this may change your personality. And I hear this a lot, like, oh, I'm really happy with how I am right now, and I don't want to change who I am because, people like me and I like myself. And if I go down this path, what if it changes me? Like, what is your response to that? And do you get that question sometimes?
So actually, funny enough, someone asked me this last weekend. Somehow it come up roughly how many psychedelic experiences I had had, and he said, do you have any regrets? Like, are you different? And I was like, of course I'm different. And I'm like, I have zero regrets. I said, yes, that has changed me. Having 500 plus psychedelic experiences has changed me for the better.
Hmm.
And they're integrated into the evolution of who I have become. And I am absolutely thrilled with that decision. And, because of that, I'm a more compassionate person. I'm a
Hmm.
more spiritual person. I have cultivated more peace. I'm more authentic. I'm more trusting. I'm more cognitively healthy. I'm more mindful. So yeah, these things can change you, and most of the time they change people for the better, as long as they're taken in a context that's supportive and integrated properly.
Well said. Well said. I think that's beautiful. And I would have to wholeheartedly agree. I mean, I haven't had the same type of experiences that you've had, but I am definitely curious. And I think even just from this episode, I had a few friends of mine talking to me about some of their experiences in the psychedelic world. And I mentioned that we were going to be doing this conversation, and they're like, yes, man, yes. So it's something that I kind of want to look into because I've been curious about ayahuasca for quite some time. I had some opportunities to try DMT, but I just wasn't ready. And I think that's another thing that's important to comment on, is that we should do these things when we're truly ready and not to feel pressured. And I'm sure you would agree with that. But
Mhm.
let's actually get more into some of this, because I see obviously you're a combo practitioner, and this sounds and seems like one of the big things that has become a part of your practice. So what the hell is combo? Like, what is it?
Yeah, so I'll just from the gate disclaimer. So Kambo is actually not a psychedelic medicine. So, while I have a passion for psychedelics, Kambo is a non-hallucinogenic experience, so it's kind of in its own category. Nonetheless, Kambo and ayahuasca are sometimes used kind of adjacently to each other, either traditionally or just these days. And on a spiritual level, I do find that they are like brother and sister. I think they work together and they communicate with each other. But Kambo is its own thing. So it's a traditional medicinal ritual that involves the skin secretion of a very specific type of tree frog called Phylomedusa bicolor. That's the scientific name, or called the giant monkey frog or giant green leaf frog, or it has kind of a million different names. But basically, it's applied to superficial burns that are made on the skin of the recipient. And within 30 seconds to a minute, the medicine is entering the body and producing a very powerful physiological effect. And this secretion is full of medicinal peptides. So a lot of them have actually been investigated scientifically, and they have amazing potential as anti-cancerous drugs, anti-inflammatory drugs, anti-malarials, antibiotics, antiviral drugs. I mean, they're really the future of so many medicines. And so once the peptides kind of get into circulation, it induces this potent effect on the body that often involves purging and vomiting, and it can be quite uncomfortable, but it's about a 20 to 30-minute experience, so it's short and sweet, as I like to say. And it's quite intense. It's a very intense experience where you have, cramping or diarrhea. Sometimes you get facial swelling, you feel hot and sweaty, you might be shaking. It's a lot, but the after effect, you don't do Kambo for that, like during the experience. That part is a bit rough for almost anybody, but afterwards you have this amazing physical and emotional and spiritual healing opportunity that is just unrivaled by any other intervention. And it's so incredibly unique, and it's something very different to a psychedelic experience. It's its own flavor or own spirit. And it really can just take us and shake us and help us get unstuck, and so that we have the opportunity to rewrite the story or the patterning or the emotions that we've just been stuck with for however long. And also there's, like I said, these very physical properties to the peptides. Like if you have chronic illnesses or autoimmune conditions like Lyme disease, like Epstein-Barr virus, or depression, or even drug addiction, PTSD, all sorts of different things, the peptides are like the chemical keys that interface with where the spirit meets the body. And so they kind of help you align the mind, body, and spirit and come back to a holistic, balanced self.
Okay. That was very wonderfully put. Thank you for that. I mean, it's beautiful the way you lay all this out, and clearly you are on top of your shit when it comes to this. So thank you for that. My immature mind goes, okay, imagine like the first person who discovered this. Like, how the hell how was this even discovered, right? Like, was there somebody out there licking frogs? Because I think of this as, or I've heard of this as, you lick a frog, but then you just explained it that you apply the secretion to a burn on the recipient. So is it either or is it both, or is licking frogs totally not a thing? Like, can you expand upon that?
So I don't know that that anyone was ever really licking a frog or a toad. And actually, I think that reference might have originated from the bufo toad. You mentioned Mike Tyson earlier, but I think what you were thinking of is his bufo, his toad experience, which contains 5-MeO-DMT. That is
That's it.
definitely a psychedelic experience. Yeah, that's a whole nother
That's
medicine. Toad
the
medicine,
one.
frog medicine, they seem similar, but they're actually very different experiences. So I actually think the licking a toad story kind of came from the psychedelic toad. If you were
Okay.
to lick or ingest Kambo orally, it's really not good. It's potentially deadly. I haven't heard of anyone dying, but I have heard of a few people trying it for fun and getting really, really ill. I figure, in the Amazon, they've had a long time to try different things, and there is a reason that they administer things the way they do. It's not like they haven't thought maybe I should eat this and see what happens. I think there's probably a good reason that they don't eat it.
Right.
And as far as the discovery of it, there is a folk tale of this shaman named Kampu, and allegedly his whole tribe was sick, and he tried all of the medicines that he knew. He tried all the plant medicines, and it wasn't working. And so he either went into trance or he drank ayahuasca. There's a few different versions. And he was given the message and the directions on how to heal his people. And he woke up on the floor of the jungle with a frog in his hand and knowledge of what to do with it. And then he healed his people. And when he passed away, the spirit of Kampu went into all of the frogs, and that's where the term Kambo comes from. So I think what probably actually happened was somebody probably had a cut on their finger and touched one of these frogs, and then found out that there was a purgative effect, and he felt really good afterwards. That's my guess.
Wow. I love just exploring the minds of our ancestors and people that, like you said, they've had a long history, a lot of time to discover various ways of doing it. And I know sometimes, like, because when I was a young kid, I used to always imagine like the first people that discovered edible foods and how like, you know, what food is edible. And of course, there's some research to say that early humans would watch animals, right? But and you know, watch what they would eat. But then there's some foods that we eat that animals don't eat, right? And so, okay, I can imagine what that was like. And then, of course, coming to this, you know, the ideas of smoking things, and, you know, and like were early humans just smoking everything? Were they applying everything to their body? And then, so I feel like early humans were just as much biohackers as we are today. We don't have, they didn't have as much, you know, technology. But um, okay, so what would you, since it's not necessarily a psychedelic, I think that was an important distinction you pointed out. Um, and you mentioned the process during the Kambo ritual is not so pleasant. It's what you gain afterwards. What would, I guess, what would be the first thing you would suggest to people if they're trying to kind of consider this as a potential healing opportunity for them?
Yeah. One, as you mentioned earlier, you have to be ready, especially with this medicine, because this is real work. It's not sexy. It's not like ayahuasca or, you know, these beautiful visions. And it can be a beautiful experience, but yeah, I mean, it's also largely painful and scary and hard. And I really encourage people to not just do it to do it, to really wait till you are called to do it, and you'll know when you're called. That's a very common thing with Kambo, is like people suddenly will just get these hits and they just know, I need to do this medicine and I don't necessarily know why. Or they start getting just what I call flirtation from the frog. They start seeing frogs, they start seeing these little signs, and they just in their heart know that it's time to seek the medicine out. So that's number one, is make sure that you have a reason to do it and that you've truly received the calling. And two, it's very important that you select a practitioner that is qualified and safe and is going to meet your needs, especially if you do have a chronic health condition or any health condition whatsoever. You want to make sure that the practitioner that you have this experience with knows how to keep you safe. They know how to make you feel safe, and they know how to hold space for you in a way that's going to allow the experience to be productive and effective for you. I see a lot of people that they go through these experiences with practitioners that don't help them feel safe, or they don't really give them informed consent about what they're actually doing. And it can be a traumatic experience for somebody if they don't feel safe or prepared for the experience. So I think selecting a practitioner is very important. And I do have some stuff that I've written up that I'm happy to, you know, share with you guys after the show. If people want to read about, you know, what I recommend when selecting a practitioner, and some red flags to look for, some questions you should ask your practitioner, etc. Um,
I would love that.
and
We can put that in the
yeah.
show notes for sure. That would be awesome.
Absolutely. And then let me think, anything else that I would say is important. Um, I think those are the two most important things.
So what comes to mind now for me is similar to, and again, I know that you pointed out the differences amongst like ayahuasca and things like that. But one of the things that I appreciated about my research into sort of identifying if I was ready for ayahuasca or not was I read the book One Spirit Medicine, and it talks about the preparation for ayahuasca, and you know, like cleansing yourself, you know, going on a very deep detox, but also preparing your mind, cleansing your mind, and like you said, identifying various callings or goals that you want to, questions you want to have answered, I guess is probably the best way to say that. Is there some sort of prep at the beginning of or before taking Kambo or doing a Kambo ritual?
So there's no traditional preparation like with ayahuasca. That's actually a very common misconception. People make the assumption that, oh, I should do a dieta like with ayahuasca. And it actually is dangerous because oftentimes people are avoiding salt in their ayahuasca preparation. And that can be a fatal mistake for before a Kambo session. So I always really emphasize, like, do not deprive yourself of salt before your Kambo experience. This is not ayahuasca. You don't need to avoid red meat. You don't need to avoid salt and sugar. You don't need to avoid sex. Like, this is a completely different, being. That being said, I do always encourage people to create some intention and ritual around why they're doing the Kambo in the first place. And the most important thing is that people are fasted for 8 to 10 hours prior, mostly because of the purgative aspect of the medicine. And I also send people an integration and intention setting guide that I put together that takes them through a couple exercises that helps them get clarity on what they want out of this ceremony, what they are seeking by having the experience, and how to really maximize the potency and direction of navigating the experience through intention. I often say that, intention and ritual is 70% of the healing, and the medicine itself, the actual physical substance, is more of a catalyst. And if you can create a container that allows for the person to really intentionally direct their experience and their process, then that is incredibly powerful when you combine those two things for somebody.
Okay, great. Um, Now let me ask this, and then we can get off of this, because what I'm trying to do is draw a picture in my own mind. And for those that are just listening to the audio here, I hope that these questions I ask are also helping to paint a picture for you as well. If you're watching on YouTube, and then you just get a chance to see how beautiful Caitlin is, and my messy room and all that stuff. But and she's got some awesome tattoos, I must say. I see those; those are great. Yeah, show the guns. So so I just kind of want to have a clearer image of, the burn that you say is administered, and then, like, how is that achieved, and then, like, if a person's doing it, because I guess another question along with, where do you burn, how do you burn, and then what's the frequency of it? Like, let's say someone came to visit you, for a retreat or something like that. Is this something that you're doing 3 times in a week, 3 times in a day, once a month, once a year? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, well, I'll answer the burn question first. So we use a vine called the Titica vine, and you have a very superficial burns. It's very just, so it's just like a blister where that top layer of skin, you kind of rub it off, and then you have this like glistening white layer of wet lymphatic tissue underneath. So it's not like you're branding somebody or they're bleeding or anything extreme like that. It's very superficial, and you can put points on different parts of the body. So I'm IKP trained originally. So in that training, we learned to put points on different chakras, different acupuncture meridian channels that may correspond to different organ systems or emotions, or even just parts of the body that need particular love. For example, if I have like a GI infection or bladder infection, I might actually put the points close to those organs that are having, some struggle. And then as far as the frequency goes, well, this is not exactly a science. There's pretty much no science on it. That's why I'm trying to pioneer some. But some tribes have an idea that they, shouldn't use Kambo more than 12 times per year. What is this based off of? I have no idea. Other tribes don't necessarily agree with that. And it also depends on the goal of the client. So, for example, if somebody has Lyme disease or some sort of chronic infection or chronic illness, I usually consider an aggressive approach for them to be once a week for 3 weeks in a row, and then potentially like some maintenance once a month for the next year. And then as they get healthier, the time in between sessions might get longer and longer. They might start needing a session once every 2 months, once every 3 months. And then I've also become a fan of microdosing lately, which is a non-purgative experience where you put just a very small amount of the medicine. And I consider it like more of a peptide therapy for managing things like chronic infections and such. So there's not really an agreed upon frequency. It really depends on kind of where the person's at in their health and where they want to get to and how much they want Kambo to be a part of that journey. Some people do it once and they get what they need and they never want to do it again. Some people do 3 days in a row back to back. I just had a client that did 3 days in a row, and that's when you're trying to make like a really major dramatic life shift, and that can really just like blow you in another direction in a substantial way. But with a chronic illness client, like doing 3 days in a row is probably too hard on their physical body, especially because they're having Herxheimer reaction. They're having die off of organisms, which it's a burden to the kidney and the liver, and it just feels like shit. So there's no right answer. We're all just guinea pigs trying to figure it out. And so far, we don't have any evidence that there are long-term detrimental effects of using Kambo regularly, but we just don't know.
That's the part you mentioned about the Herxheimer response and the die-off. That's what sort of made me think of asking the question about any sort of prep, because I would imagine there would be less of that response if a person comes into a ritual healthier than, say, someone who has a lot to die off or a lot to kill off. So I think there maybe is some sort of balance there. It sounds like, at least. But that's very fascinating, and I appreciate your honesty on the fact that we just don't really know. But it's also why you're doing what you're doing, to try to get more clarity in this field. Now, one more question along the lines of application. So it sounds like this is dosed out. You have it dosed out, I guess, per your practice, right? So is it like a drop out of a dropper bottle constitutes like one full session, or is it, how does that work? Because I'm trying to also picture that.
Yeah. So people's sensitivity to the substance is highly variable. And also the frogs have unique chemistry too. And so the peptide composition of one frog can vary entirely differently from another frog. So it's a bit of a wild card every time. Also,
Wow.
when you start putting points on different parts of the body, the level of potency changes. For example, points on the back of the neck or the chest are going to be stronger than a point on the ankle. So as far as like a standard dosage, there kind of isn't one. And also the surface area size of the actual burns. So the size of the stick that you're using can dictate how big the burn is. So in my practice, I always do what's called a test point on first timers. And I recommend that anyone that does Kambo for the first time, that they should be administered a test point. So that's one question they can ask their practitioner. But I put, usually for a first timer, I'll burn three burns on the upper arm. And then I'll apply this test point. And then I give them about 2-3 minutes and just see how they're going to respond. Because for some people, that test point is actually a full dose. It's a full purgative experience for them.
Wow.
They might even be like fainting and like purging all over the place. Like it can be really strong. And for someone else, they might not even feel anything. And then I go, okay, and I put the other 2 points on and they have all 3. And sometimes even that's not enough. And then I add more and put another 2 and they have 5 points. And also you do build tolerance depending on your unique chemistry and also when you last took your Kambo session last time. So you generally tend to go up in the number of points as you develop a tolerance if you're using the medicine in short proximity to each other. but it's really all over the place. And, even someone who's done it as often and as frequently as I have, I don't take large doses. I'm actually quite sensitive. And most of the time when I'm using this on myself these days, I'm actually microdosing, and it's quite strong for me. I'm putting like 1/2 the size of a regular point of the Kambo on my ankle, and I'm still like, kind of at the edge there of where I want to be. So the dosage really requires a skillful practitioner that knows the medicine and is communicating with the clients to come up with what's going to be an effective and hopefully conservative dose. I think, you can always take more, but you can't take less, sort of thing. So I'm quite conservative in how much I put on people, and also as a respect to the preciousness of this valuable resource. It comes from the Amazon, from an animal, a living creature. And I don't think that we need that much medicine to get profound effects in people.
Okay. Now, the fact that you just mentioned animal, it comes from an animal, and I have to also play, I guess, devil's advocate for those out there that are concerned about the animals, and
Of course.
um, is this secretion sort of a defense mechanism in which they need to be squeezed or something, or scared in order to have this secretion, or is it just like sweating, like how a human sweats?
So a little bit of both, actually. This is their defensive secretion. It does protect them from predators, but they also rub it all over themselves to protect themselves from microbial infections like fungus. So it's something that they voluntarily decide when they want to secrete.
Hmm.
And of course, unless you're there extracting it yourself, you never know 100% how that specific frog was being treated. But the indigenous people really do respect these creatures, and they live amongst them, and they believe that if you harm the frog, that bad luck is going to come to you. So generally speaking, most people report that they see that these frogs are handled in a very kind way,
Mhm.
that you can harvest them in a sustainable and ethical way. You can make sure not to take too much of their secretion so that they have enough for themselves to keep themselves safe. There are ways of marking them with a dye to see if a frog has been recently milked so that it's not over harvested. And the frog populations themselves are in very healthy condition. Nobody fucks with them. Like nobody wants to eat these frogs, so they don't really have any predators. So
Interesting.
they don't really have population decline. Habitat loss is more of an issue for them, and pretty much every creature in the Amazon. So there doesn't seem to be currently any evidence of over harvesting or a requirement for it to be an abusive situation with the frog. Some people will tie up the frog by its legs and its arms, and it does look potentially a bit uncomfortable. But we also have to remember that they call to these frogs, they do like a special croak, sing to them, and the frogs come down from the trees. They choose to do that, and then they're very chill frogs. And I've seen, videos of once they're released from the milking process, they're not in any hurry to go anywhere. They're like, and they just kind of crawl around, and they're not like, terrorized or traumatized. They're not running away. They seem like they aren't that bothered with it, honestly.
Could you do your best impression of the calling?
Oh God. So it sounds a little bit like a dog barking. I'm not going to do a good job at this, but I can try just for shits and giggles.
Why
I think
not?
it's, I think it's more of like a something like that. I
I
think you
love
should
it.
just look it up on YouTube.
I
It'll be
will
more
do
satisfying.
that. I will definitely do that. Yeah. So when you mentioned the calling them out of the trees, and then they come down on their own and things like that, it sounds really cool, and it's a good point in that they don't really have predators because, yeah, like that's their defense mechanism. So it's really cool. It just made me wonder if maybe the different compounds are based upon if it's their own natural secretion for their own protection, or if it's a defense mechanism secretion. And I've kind of find that might be an interesting thing to look into, right? Because maybe it's more potent if it's, as a defense mechanism, or maybe it's more potent if it's for their own protection or whatever. But this is where my mind goes when I have conversations like this. So
Yeah, and one thing that's really interesting, because I've gotten so deep into just thinking about what venoms and poisons actually are, and a lot of frogs specifically, their poisons aren't necessarily toxic, but they'll have these little hacks to help them just avoid being eaten. For example, some frog poisons, and I think this likely includes Kambo, induces like uncontrollable yawning in snakes. So if you're a snake and you have your mouth around a frog and suddenly there's this stuff being secreted into your mouth that's making you yawn uncontrollably, it's going to allow the frog to just gently crawl its way out of danger. And so I actually think it's a really sweet, like, diplomatic way of avoiding being eaten or avoiding conflict. Is like, excuse me, sir, can you just open your mouth and let me out, please?
wow.
So it could be that this isn't actually meant to be a toxic, deadly substance. Most of the time, venoms and poisons actually aren't designed to be deadly. They're designed to deter, from being eaten. So with the Kambo, these peptides, they're actually, not really that toxic at all to animal cells. Some of these peptides, they're more effective at killing pathogens than conventional antibiotics, but they have less toxicity to animal cells than conventional antibiotics. So we don't actually see a lot of poisonous effects on animal physiology. So I would assume that there might be some similarities in snakes and other creatures that would be considered predators for these frogs.
Wow. Okay, I love it. This is definitely as much as I had ever expected to know about Kambo, and I'm gonna continue looking into it, and I'll definitely be reaching out to you, and I obviously hope that we can have more conversations around this. But because you do so much as a neurobiologist and also someone with your own bit of issues that you've had to deal with, like, what are some other things that you would like listeners to know about what you do in your experience? Because ultimately, like, I would hope that people reach out to you to try to just figure out ways to help themselves as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And you said it, you really do have to help yourself. If you wait around for something or someone to rescue you, you'll wait forever. So, sometimes that means you have to try something a little wacky and bizarre like frog medicine.
Yeah.
But you won't be disappointed. A lot of people in the world at this point have very safely and happily taken Kambo and had amazing results. And when administered correctly with the guidance of a safe and knowledgeable practitioner, this seems to be a very safe medicine for most people. Of course, there's some contraindications, and hopefully your practitioner screens for those, and that will be part of the practitioner document that I'll send to you. But yeah, my goal is to empower people as much as possible, really to access all sorts of different modalities. But I have been sort of recruited by the frog to be its puppet, and I'm all in the Kambo stuff now. So there's a few ways that I've chosen to be in service to people and the frog, the spirit of the frog. So I just built a Kambo directory site called Kambo Finder. And the goal is to empower individuals to find Kambo professionals in their area so that they can access this medicine. And you can, do advanced filters. You can filter by experience level, by certain certifications, by reviews and ratings, things like that. So you can go to kambofinder.com if you feel like you're ready to play with the idea of finding a practitioner near you. And I just started teaching a specialty training course to existing practitioners on how to work with people with Lyme disease and autoimmune conditions, because it's not something that people come out of their basic training having knowledge of how to approach people with more fragile health. So I've started helping people specialize in those type of clients' needs. And then I've been moving forward with these Kambo scientific research projects that are quite quite challenging, actually. Turns out there's probably good reason why nobody's done this yet. It's not a very happily accepted thing that the scientific community is that interested in having information published in their journals. So I have a few studies that are pending publication, and then I just secured funding for a larger observational study over the next 2 years for the psychometric evaluations of Kambo. So I'm really excited about that, and that's pretty much what's taken up most of my attention these days. But I'm happy if anyone wants to reach out to me if they have a question or they just want to connect. There's a variety of ways you can do that. You can go onto my website, medicinefrogkambo.com. Or you can find me on Instagram, medicinefrogkambo, and shoot me an email, shoot me a message, and whatever you're inspired to share with me, feel free.
This is perfect and very, very much wrapped up in a nice little bow. If you don't mind, though, before we start to kind of wrap up, are there a couple of contraindications that you can recall just quickly off the top of your head? Just because I know some people listening to this, yeah, they're going to possibly see the show notes, but they might want to just reach out to you right away, or they might see that, or they might hear that, oh, you know what, this is probably not for me, so let me find something else. And I'm sure you could help them in other things, but what are some contraindications just off the top of the head?
Yeah, of course. So, if you're pregnant, you probably don't want to use Kambo because, could potentially harm the fetus. We just don't know. And if you are, if you've had like an organ transplant and you're on immunosuppressive drugs, that might be a bit risky for you to receive because there is a very strong immune boosting aspect to this ritual. If you have a history of heart disease or heart attack, or history of stroke or aneurysm or embolism, it's probably pretty risky because there are vascular effects and vasodilation and constriction that could happen. And it can actually push somebody who is susceptible into a state of psychosis. So if somebody has a history of schizophrenia or severe manic episodes, or just severe psychological disorders, it's possible that this experience could potentially trigger an episode of that. So that's important to consider also. But yeah, actually,
Yeah.
it's surprising how many people with a lot of severe health issues can safely take Kambo.
Yeah, because when you mentioned early on about the fact that it's not a psychedelic, I do know that there are certain compounds that might trigger someone who has anxiety disorders and things like that, and that could just be from discomfort, from vomiting, or from explosive diarrhea, or whatever the case may be. Because I know some people that are close to me, when they feel moments of the need to kind of let go, it's what freaks them out a little bit. And it sounds like this is what Kambo might do to someone. It's kind of like, well, no, you're on this ride for about 30 minutes or so. So I can see why that might trigger someone with those kind of situations. So I'm glad you pointed that out. But yeah, go ahead.
I was gonna say, that stuff does come up where people can have anxiety during the experience and whatnot, and that's not generally concerning. Like that's just they're going through some sort of emotional, psychological process. Usually, when we're seeing these people that are having these triggered psychotic episodes, it's generally very much chemically based because excess dopamine activity is associated with these states of psychosis, which is part of why drugs that induce dopamine activity like methamphetamine, cocaine, or even LSD, they can kind of push a little bit too much on these dopamine pathways and trigger the psychosis. And Kambo seems to upregulate dopamine activity or receptor expression, and we're not really sure, but dopamine activity at the least. So that's kind of what we see, is there's like a very real chemical component to the person's physiology. But the emotional stuff, most people have that come up and they get scared and they have to work through it, and that's really common and not so much of a concern.
All right. You have been such a joy in explaining all this. And of course, I want to leave a little bit for the listeners to check back in, and hopefully we get you back on the show and we talk about some of the other things, because there's a load of questions that I could ask that would drive this into a 4-hour episode. We won't do that. I'm sure we have plenty to do. But like I do with most guests that come onto the show, I like to finish with asking a couple of questions. And one of those first questions is, what are your top 2 pet peeves?
Oh man, I should have thought of these. Well, let's see. I'll do one serious and one kind of silly. Um, One of my main pet peeves is when people say they want to get better, but they won't do what's good for them when they're in their own way. That's like, for some reason, that's triggering for me, probably because I was in my own way a lot in my life. um and I think my second pet peeve is when the geckos in Bali shit on my bed. I'm like, oh damn, they did it
Oh,
again.
man.
It's like just part of living in the jungle.
That's
Yeah.
hilarious. I love it. That's probably one of the best ones we've had so far, I have to admit. So thank you for that. Um, and then to finish on a more beautiful, positive note, what is something you're most grateful for?
um I am really grateful to have ended up in Bali during the pandemic on accident.
Yeah.
Yes,
Wow.
it's been a lovely time here, a beautiful experience, and I have learned so much. I've grown so much, and I am so grateful to have landed here during this crazy time.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think Bali is definitely on my list of places to visit in the future. Hopefully, in the very near future. And if you're still there, I would love to connect with you in person, and we can just vibe out on all sorts of things. Maybe we could do like a workout, and then we finish with a combo ritual or something. Um, but yeah, I'm very, very thankful for having you on the show. If you could please let listeners know and viewers know the best ways to find out more about you. I know you kind of mentioned it before, but maybe you can do it again so people have a better sense of how to get in touch with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, probably going on to medicinefrogcambo.com. That's my website. From there, you can email me. You can see some of the blogs that I've written, and just some of the other stuff that's going on. And like I said, if you want to find a Kambo practitioner near you, you can go to kambofinder.com. And I have Instagram accounts for both of these things, so feel free to connect with me. There's many ways, and all paths lead to Rome, as they say.
All right. Yeah, I will share all of that on the show notes, and then hopefully we can get to sharing the other stuff you mentioned. And yeah, I think I hope everyone enjoyed this as much as I did. And again, thank you so much for your time. And another big shout out to our boy Roy. Thanks for connecting
Yeah.
us. And
Thanks, Roy.
yeah, I'm gonna be working on my frog call. How do you say that? Frog call.
Okay.
Yeah.
Don't quote me as your teacher, please.
All right. Well, Caitlin, thank you for your time. And to all the listeners, thank you for listening. Thank you for those who are watching. If you haven't had a chance to check us out on YouTube, please feel free to do so. Don't forget to subscribe. Also, subscribe on all of the podcast platforms you like to listen to. Send us a review, comment, do all the stuff. Just support the show as much as you can, okay? Until next time, peace.
Walk the talk,
Thank you.
talking facts. Move like me, but I move a little fast. Make my move, here to last. Fasten these seatbelts, I'm coming past. Take care of me, longevity. Hack my biology, better believe. Walking the talk, soul, mind, and body connected. Better come give us a listen. Better come give us a minute or two. Open the box up, we giving you tools. Giving your engine the fuel that it needs. Breathing into it, it's autoimmune. Make a connection, we're stronger in two. Making us one of a kind of a few. Work on the mind, but show me your moves. If you do what you say, you know what to do. Yeah.
Simply walk the talk.